Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Amber, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about Metallic Heart, book 1 in the Fade series by Liahona West. Now, several disclaimers. 1, the battered look is intentional. I am minorly cosplaying as the main character of the book. And 2, this video is not monetarily sponsored in any way. However, I did receive an advanced copy of the book in order to review on my social channels. Now, before I get too far into this review, I did want to mention a few trigger warnings about the book itself in case you happen to want to read it. The book does involve killing, some episodes of PTSD, a few mentions of some slight self-harm in the form of a wrist scratching, and it does involve the G slur at one point. It is in fact used as a slur towards the Roma and Romani people. Many people in the United States are not aware of this, as we have received the bastardized version of the word, where people thinks it means like wanderer and traveler and wanderlust and that kind of like white hippie boho type thing, and that is not the case. Historically, and especially still in Europe, it is used to be incredibly racially loaded. While the book itself did not use it in any way hateful or anything like that, I don't think it was known as being a slur by the author. It was used in reference to the breed name of a specific type of horse that has several different nicknames that do involve the G slur. So like I said, I do not think it was intentional in any way, just educating the masses because a lot of people aren't aware of the history of the word. Now, the book itself takes place in the year 3040, about 7 years after a nuclear disaster hit the United States, essentially making it a dystopia. And we follow several main characters, primarily Eloise, Banak, and Joy. Eloise is a girl. She turns 21 in the book. When she was a child, she happened to be in a car accident that caused some injuries that she nearly died from. However, her parents happened to be scientists who are working on a project including these things called nanites, which are these like tiny robotic things that can get put into the bloodstream to help different disorders and things like that. They were still earlier in the testing phases, so nothing ever got proved and the nanites were never used widespread, but they did happen to use the nanites on her that happened to save her life, and those were the only known successful uses of the nanites, which also essentially makes her more or less indestructible. She does heal incredibly quickly, which makes her a target for Joy. Joy being one of her parents' old business associates who happens to have a son who was Eloise's sister's best friend. Seth is incredibly sick, so they've been doing like regular blood draws from Eloise trying to use her nanites to heal Seth, and it hasn't really worked. So Joy has become increasingly frustrated and desperate as a mother trying to save her son, and it shows a bit of her descent into, you know, terror and madness and her questionable choices. And then we have Eloise, who's trying to escape Joy because Joy has now decided that she wants to just kill Eloise because the blood draws aren't working. She needs all of the nanites in Eloise's body. Obviously, Eloise doesn't want to die, especially for somebody that she's not even sure she can save. So Eloise has to try and escape Joy's wrath. And while doing so, Eloise happens to run into Banak, who happened to be a childhood best friend of Eloise that she hadn't seen in the 7 years since the nuclear disaster. And Banak having a history of having worked for Joy for a while, but after doing all of these awful, terrible things, finally breaks and decides that he can't do it anymore. So he had been on the run from Joy, but had gone back in an attempt to try and get Joy to wipe his memories so he could forget the horrible things that happened to his family. But in doing so, ends up running into Eloise, and that whole plan of his ends up blowing up in his face as he's now determined to try and help Eloise. And it follows their story going through this whole process and just their attempts at trying to defeat Joy. And there are obviously like other characters as well, because Eloise has this whole home base called the Compound, where it's like this entire community of post-apocalyptic people like living together in more or less harmony. And Banak has been trying to find somewhere where he belongs because he hasn't found anywhere like the Compound yet. And it's just this whole dystopian story. I do quite enjoy the story itself. I think it's incredibly fascinating, and I am very, very curious to see where they take the story from where they did. But that being said, I do think that overall the book kind of just felt a little underdeveloped for my taste. Like, it wasn't written poorly in any way. It just felt more like a draft than a final version. I mean, as you can see, like, it is more of a shorter novel, and they definitely could have stood to extend the events a little bit, give us a little bit of fluff in between, because we really did get a lot of like event, and not a lot of banality in between, which I do think the book could have benefited from for world building, relationship building, and just length, especially when it comes to the dialogue. I feel like there were throughout the story a few conversations that were just very, very emotionally intense and good conversations, but it didn't have enough build up to them, so they weren't quite as impactful as I feel like they could have been had we gotten a little bit of the extra fluff and build up in between. And especially when it comes to the development, I would have loved to have seen a little bit more when it comes to the relationship that is had. I do think that the relationship was very, very cute, but I do think that we should have seen a little bit more build up and background to it, because like they're friends and then they both kind of have like the fleeting thought of like, oh, maybe, and then like all of a sudden they're in love with each other. And I just would have liked to have seen a lot more build up to that. And I could have even stood to see the couple not getting together by the end of the book and like having it more of a slow burn and like pass into the next book in the installment. Now, whether or not the next book in this installment is going to center around the same main characters is a point of debate, especially after the epilogue that the book had. The epilogue made it feel a little bit more finalized than I would have expected for the first installment in the series. So I'm not sure if the series is going to continue surrounded by these particular main characters, or if it's just going to happen like in the same universe but centering some of the other side characters. Either way, I would be interested in seeing what they do with it, because we do have a lot of side characters that I would like to see more background on and more page time with. So I wouldn't be mad if the series centered around other people more specifically in other installments, but I also wouldn't mind seeing what happens to these particular characters after the events of this book, because it does have a little bit of a sense of finality with the epilogue, but it's a super not necessary. Like, there's still obviously like entire lives that could still be lived. So it really could go either way, and I'm definitely very, very curious to see where West goes with it. Another aspect that I would have liked seeing developed a little bit more is the nuclear background of the apocalypse, because that's not anything that I've personally ever read. I have never seen the idea of a nuclear apocalypse being used, and I thought that the idea was fascinating, but we didn't get any signs of the nuclear aspect, you know, like there isn't any radiation consideration anywhere. There isn't like major damage that we see in the book specifically. So it honestly could have been an apocalypse of any variety, because we just didn't get a ton of back detail into it. And in future installments, I would love to see that become more of a consideration. You know, like maybe they work with more scientists in the future and have more of the effects of the radiation considered, or something like that. I think could be a really fun opportunity to lean into. One aspect of the book that I did really, really like was the focus on trauma, because the book does very heavily focus on the characters' traumas and the fact that they've experienced them, and that the apocalypse has not been a walk in the park. And I think that that's something that is incredibly realistic, because most like post-apocalyptic media that I've seen, whether it's like movies, TV shows, books, we really don't get a lot of mental health consideration in them. Like there's just all these people who are like more or less fine and just still like fighting for their lives and stuff. And we don't get to see a lot of the mental health aspects of that, which like obviously there would be a ton. Like you're not going to be able to see like all of your friends and your family die and things like that and not be affected by that for the most part. And there are all these TV shows where it's kind of just like, yeah, it sucks, but like by the next episode, they're fine. And it's like, let's develop that a little bit more. And this book definitely did that, perhaps to an extreme. That was definitely the primary focus of the book, I felt like, was the trauma, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But like I said, I would have loved to have seen a little bit more fluff and development in between the events of the book. But one primary thing that I did like was the main character Eloise, which does happen to be the character that I'm loosely cosplaying, did have several episodes of PTSD featured in the book. And I liked the fact that there's a book that features a main character with PTSD, especially in the sense of it not being what the traditional stereotyped thought of like a person with PTSD is. Because in modern times, most people tend to think of like, oh, old army vets and things like that, when PTSD can happen to anybody. I thought it was a really, really interesting perspective because that's just something that we don't get to see a lot of the time, especially because it is a mental illness that is more stigmatized. It shouldn't be, but it is. You know how it goes. But the way that the episodes are written does lead to a little bit of confusion that like I was able to read fine because I am familiar with the signs and symptoms of it. So I was able to read how the episodes were written and like catch on fairly quickly. But I feel like people who don't have any firsthand experience with it or who just aren't familiar with the signs and symptoms of this disorder would be a little bit more lost and confused as to what's going on, especially because the term PTSD isn't specifically used in the book. It is in like the author's note, so I can give a name to what it is in the book, but the book itself does not use the term. As much as I do think it has the potential of leaving people not familiar with PTSD a little bit lost while reading, I don't know if I would necessarily suggest writing the flashbacks and hallucinations in a different way, because generally they do come on unexpectedly, or there is a specific trigger that causes them, but you can't always control yourself around certain triggers and you can't always limit your exposure to them. So as it happens, like it does tend to happen in the middle of just life going on as itself. How it's represented in the book, like it'll just happen in the middle of Eloise doing something else and suddenly she's having flashbacks or hallucinations and isn't exactly sure where she is because her mind is just experiencing so many different sensations of past trauma and what's going on in the present. So I don't know. I don't know if I would suggest writing it differently. I would just recommend anybody who wants to read the book maybe doing a little bit of research about PTSD before you go in, or go into the book just being aware that that's what she has. I would absolutely love to see the book adapted into a TV show. Like I desperately want to see a screenwriter get their hands on the book and see their interpretation of the events, because I could like very easily visualize it as a like longer slow burn TV show that's like a cross between like The Walking Dead, The Hunger Games, and Divergent kind of vibes. I don't know, I could very easily see it translating well into a TV show because I think there's enough content to be able, like even though the book is quite short, a lot of things happen, and if it were developed into a visual medium, there would be plenty of content to be able to watch for like a ton of different episodes. So producers out there, get on it. Overall, I really enjoyed the story. I would love to see future installments expanded a little bit more than it was. But that being said, I would definitely be interested in and willing to read future installments of the book, which is not something I can always say for all the books that I review. I can't believe that I went and filmed the entire book review for this book and forgot the PR aspects of it. I got my first Bookish PR. Well, I guess I can't say it's my first Bookish PR because I've received so many books for review purposes and I'm so incredibly grateful, but this is the first time that I've had any goodies attached to the book that I was receiving. So, you know, I'm a sucker for cute shit. I love that extra immersion into the world. So I did want to show some of the goodies that I did get in correspondence with Metallic Heart. A little thank you note that's just personalized and signed by the author. 2 little branded bookmarks. That's the word I'm looking for. So we have this one, the quote, "Moments like this with her are eternal," with the blade of one of the characters' swords on it. And then we have a second bookmark that says, "I need you to tell me something. Do I have any chance with you?" Which is another quote, and it features one of the characters' cats on it. And then I also received an art print of some of the characters, which is super fun. This print was by, if you want to check out any of their work, but this is the art print that I got of the 2 main characters, the 2 characters that are featured on the cover of the book as well. You can tell I definitely get my inspiration for the crazy wild redhead look. Thank you guys so much for watching. I had a blast hanging out with y'all. Peace.